Welcome to episode 58 of Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. And my God, I hope I got the number right.
Wait a minute.
With your math.
I think this is Home Brew History.
It is Homebrew History. It's also the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast.
Mary, left the door open again. Look who's here.
Yeah, look what the cat dragged in, you know.
Literally.
Yeah. For those who know, sometimes my cat likes to, voice his own opinions, and usually they're not very good ones. But you know what? It's great to see you all. So welcome to our little collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we've got the Homebrew History podcast and the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast teamed up together for a very special recording and a very special mission at the end. So we're bringing these two podcasts together for the greater good. Oh my goodness, there's people out there that are going to be the beneficiary of this disaster tonight. Who knows?
Wow.
So, Darren and Mary, welcome to Homebrew History. Thank you all so much for being able to join us today.
Thank you, and Joe and Bo, welcome to the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast.
It's great to all be here. Kumbaya.
Kumbaya.
Look at this. Sitting around the campfire, having a couple of beers, talking history, going to raise some money, having a good time. It's so it's definitely fun. Definitely tons of this crossover type episode. This is a lot. First we've ever done this. This is exciting for us.
Yeah, I think we've done one other one with our friends over from Finding on Film, but this is I think this is certainly a new idea, I guess. Bringing all the collaboration or the collaborative effort of both podcasts, both audiences together to see what we can accomplish for our little fundraiser at the end. But I think what might be really cool is first to kind of talk about how both of our shows got started. Kind of what's going to happen is that listeners of Civil War Breakfast Club that have never heard of Homebrew History are going to hear us for the very first time. Likewise, listeners of Homebrew History will hear about the Breakfast Club possibly for the very first time. And so we kind of just want to maybe introduce ourselves.
Okay, well, Darren and I started this podcast, what was it, August of 2020?
Yep. It only seems like 80 years ago, but it's amazingly just 1 year. August 2020 we started. We decided to take our Civil War beer conversations and start recording them and putting them on a podcast. So it was almost a little more than a year ago.
Yep.
And y'all talk about just about everything under the sun, is that right?
Yeah, we do. We cover Eastern theater, Western theater. We do some off-the-wall topics like we've done drinking and the Civil War, where we talked about the history of alcohol in regards to the Civil War. But then we each picked some generals that we would drink with without knowing the full history behind some of them, only to discover that some of those generals we had picked did not drink. Which made it really interesting.
We've always said, like in a place like Gettysburg or a place like Franklin, sometimes the best conversations you have about history are sitting in a bar, just running some random dude and talking history. And those are the best conversations I've ever had about history. And so that's kind of what our podcast is. Just imagine just sitting around. No opinion's really wrong. No, it's not one of those type things where we always have to demand that everything's tight and factual. We try to talk about whatever pops into our minds and try to have it be entertaining and educational. So that's always been kind of the MO of this podcast, certainly.
Yep. And we enjoy playing the what if game, which we've done in a few episodes. I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's certainly something that we enjoy doing on here. And, from the podcast, it's grown into having a round table once a month via Zoom. We do Facebook Lives every Saturday at 10. We have a book club as well, and a forum on our website. And really, it's grown out of just how supportive people have been. And the other thing we like to do with this podcast is just make these people, these soldiers, human, that they're not just dots on a map and, just thinking war things all the time. They're humans. And that's what we love to do with this.
Yeah. A dedicated listener over here joined you for the Facebook Lives and stuff. I've listened since the first maybe 4 or 5 episodes, and then went back, binged all of those, got through. Actually, I had everybody listening to the Shiloh episodes before we went on the trip, and they all said the same thing that you guys said in the second episode. What was that rattling? Oh, it was so bad. And so we got through the second episode, and it was just a blast. And then we actually listened to the end of the second episode while we were driving through the park. So
Oh, cool.
that's what I've loved listening to y'all's episodes while I'm doing Battlefield stuff, because it's like you're listening to it and then all of a sudden you're seeing it at the same time. Y'all's tour through Chickamauga was awesome because I was following where y'all were saying the next part of the action. The next brawl in the bar room was right down this street. So hook a right and get down to Dyersfield.
Well, thank you. We appreciate your support too, and seeing you pop on our Facebook Lives and our roundtables too, especially last week for trivia. We do trivia nights every so often too.
Yeah, the trivia was so much fun, but I'll tell you what, there's nobody that's going to beat Curtis anytime in the near future.
No,
He seems like he is the winner
He is
forever.
the Civil War Rain Man of this stuff. I don't know how we even congratulated him on the podcast for winning before the actual contest. That's how powerful we were, and it actually worked itself out because he did win. So there you go.
So, Bo, what about Homebrew History? How did we get started? Because the origin story is contrived and misconstrued, but I know it starts at the Yalta conference with Dr. Rob Citino, and just kind of grew from there. But what did we decide to just sit down and do it? I don't.
Yeah.
We tell the story and I forget every time.
Yeah, it does start at the Yalta conference. Joey and I had, he and I had gone through the master's program at our respective university together, and we actually got this opportunity to go to this very, I thought it was awesome, little sort of roundtable discussion about the importance of the Yalta conference. And Joey and I had been talking about this for some time, wanting to do some kind.
It was a cooking show.
It was an Italian Cajun YouTube cooking channel, and somehow or another, Joey and I got to drinking one day and said, you know what, we're not going to do this whole cooking show because God knows we'd probably set the place on fire. So let's not do that. Let's set people's brains afire. Let's do a history podcast, and thus Homebrew History was born. So it seems.
Wow.
We started in May of 2020, and we've just passed up our 30,000th download, and we are 14 different countries or 18 different countries, global listenership. It's been great to be able to connect with people from around the world, and we don't restrict ourselves to just the Civil War, just World War II, or just the Cold War. We kind of have branched out into some other stuff. We did, I think, still my favorite episode, and I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a foodie, was our history of barbecue. I thought that was maybe the best episode we had done because not only am I a barbecuer, but I loved learning about some of the South American origins as well as the African origins of the food that we eat today. And
Joey's actually a 65-year-old man. He's interested in the Second World War and barbecued meats, which are...
Yeah, I managed to do both categories at 25.
Wow.
That's like every old guy I know, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Barbecue in World War II. Throwing complaining about the government and watching college football, and you got the entire thing right there.
Well, fortunately, I can't check off the college football because my college football team is trash, so I'll never get a chance to do that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Go Vols.
Hey, Tennessee Volunteers, you guys had your day,
20 years ago.
That's a very cool origin story. We definitely relate to the whole, we got to having some drinks one day. That's how the best ideas are born, right?
It's true. I've written some of the best papers in graduate school, just, a fifth of whiskey already in, and honestly, I couldn't tell if they made sense, but apparently they did, because, they gave me the degree, but, hey, who knows?
Well, you find that perfect blend of just enough alcohol. It makes you better at work, golf, whatever it is. You hit that one spot, and you stay there, and you got it.
That's right.
And growing up here in Boston, I can tell you all the memoirs of Samuel Adams and Ben Franklin. They stayed right there when they did everything, so it was perfect. So anyway, so what are we doing tonight, boys and girl?
Thank you.
Well, what we're talking about battlefield reclamation, and I think one thing that we always do on our show, and you guys do it on your show, is we talk about what we're drinking tonight, and we have a little segment. It's called What's in Your Cup. You've got a segment that talks about the cup that you're drinking from. So let's go ahead and, Bo, I'll ask, Civil War Breakfast Club podcast and Bo Trissler, what is in your cup?
I guess I'll start us off. I am drinking, right now, I'm drinking Hazy State IPA by Collective Arts Brewing, which is probably my favorite brewery here in Canada. I call it the Treehouse of Canada, which is, Darren will tell you, is the best beer from New England, which I've never had before, but the way he raves about it, I feel like I have, and I feel like it's probably just as good as what Collective Arts is. And I'm drinking it out of my Civil War Breakfast Club mug, because I decided to bring the merch with me. Got to bring the brand with me tonight.
Bring the brand.
Definitely. Well, for me, using the company mug as well, because she copies me. And I'm drinking, speaking of drinking, it's called Number 9 by Treehouse. Like Trish mentioned, it's the best beer in the world. We proudly don't ship this anywhere outside of just the breweries in Massachusetts, so it's fantastic stuff. So it's very, really good. Definitely not going to send it to Canada. No way. Forget that.
I'll get there eventually.
Well, I actually left my drink outside of my recording room, and I'm kind of mad at myself. But I was drinking Tennessee Honey right off the rocks. It's been that kind of day. It's to keep a long story short, it's a Tennessee Honey kind of day.
I got a full bottle of that in my cupboard over here, Bo, just in case you're curious.
Yes. As Joey knows, it's my number one juice. So, he knows. It is.
That's my case of a bad work day or nuclear attack. That's my go-to drink too. So it's always ready for it. It's always there.
I've got little Harpet's chicken scratch. It's a Pilsner. It's delicious. And I am drinking it from my Damn the
Very
Torpedoes Fort Gaines mug, which is a who knows if he ever actually said "Damn the Torpedoes, full speed ahead,"
Yep.
but
Barry
it's a
gets
nice
come up in
thing
a
to
few of our
imagine,
episodes.
and I get to say it every time I drink the cup. So what have we got on the agenda for tonight?
We're going to talk about battlefield preservation, right? We're going to talk about maybe looking at specifically on our side some of the Civil War battlefields, how the whole thing got started with preservation. And then we talk about specifically about a couple of the big boys like Gettysburg, Chickamauga, places like that, and just talk about some of the challenges they have, both plus and minus, about this never-ending saga of trying to save these battlefields.
Yeah, and we are definitely going to be discussing also, we are going to end off with a place that is very near and dear to all of our hearts, especially Joe's, Battle of Franklin and Battle of Franklin Trust is what we're going to end off with tonight. So yeah, so battlefield preservation is not a new thing at all. It actually, we know places like American Battlefield Trust now, we know Civil War Trails, Battle of Franklin Trust, and I think it seems a little bit more well known, especially with the advent of social media and the ability to do Facebook Lives, what Battle of Franklin Trust does, as well as what American Battlefields does. Civil War Trails has a great social media account. But it actually goes back to even in the years like right after the Civil War, but you don't really see it too much until the 1890s. Once things had cooled off a little bit, is when you really start to hear about it. And that's when, U.S. Congress authorizes the creation of Chickamauga as a battlefield. And that opens in 1895. And it kind of set the standard for Shiloh, Vicksburg, and Gettysburg, all of which opened in that year as well. And they were all established and based on Chickamauga. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, walking into the Chickamauga Visitor Center with a Gettysburg hoodie on, they made it very well known that they sent cannons to Gettysburg when they started establishing it as a park as well, which kind of made me laugh that there's this little rivalry going on between, and of course it's East versus Western theater, right? So you have these, and it was kind of like a grassroots effort, like you have Sickles at Gettysburg establishing it there. You have Henry Boynton and Ferdinand Van der Veer being the reins behind getting Chickamauga going. You even have land being purchased by soldiers. For instance, Cheatham Hill at Kennesaw Mountain is purchased by soldiers in an Illinois regiment. And it wasn't until the 1930s that Kennesaw was actually bought and started to be turned into an actual battlefield. But that's kind of the first phase of this, is in the 1890s is when it begins.
Well, it actually goes before that a little bit, though. I mean, they talk, the Ken Burns series, which kind of really spurred a lot of this, talk about how the Civil War was fought in 10,000 places. Who knows how true that is, but it's hyperbole. But those battlefields are kind of all over the place. And as soon as the war ended, you had that preservation process really start. Now, some of it was just from local soldiers who were still alive before they trying to raise their own money. There was three monuments placed at Manassas almost immediately. This is before 1890. There's still two left, actually. You have the establishment of those national cemeteries that were started. Gettysburg, for example, Ball's Bluff, places like that. So because of the cemeteries, you kind of had a natural preservation around them, which kind of started cemetery out, right? Cold Harbor, Ball's Bluff at Leesburg, places like that. Really, Gettysburg really got the whole thing kind of really going, though. But, these places are slowly disappearing because you've got that constant tug and pull of commercialism, especially in the East, versus history. And if you go, the battlefields are disappearing, faster than beer and Mary's fridge on a Friday night. To be honest, they're going. So there are these different aspects to keep them. Now, Mary mentioned the 1890s. You have the North and South reconciliation starting, right? And some of the vets are still alive too. There's some of these old coots are still kicking. And you kind of have Congress at this point trying to kick in some money. Most land hadn't been gobbled up yet. It was starting to, but it really hadn't. And you have the establishment in the 1890s, those 5 major national battlefields that kind of happened. So you got Shiloh, right? Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Vicksburg, and Antietam and Gettysburg. So you have those that were really kind of the first real genesis of it. Ironically, not one is in Virginia, which is where most of the battles were fought. So it's kind of funny how that plays itself out. And that generation kind of led for a while until things kind of slowed down again. Jump ahead to the 1920s, that era, you got very few vets left now. But there's a new energy of preservation kind of starts again. And this is because that urban development's really pushing now. So now people are they're starting to realize that these battlefields are starting to go away. It was around now when Virginia got the memo when they smelled the coffee with this, because it was around here that Petersburg, Appomattox, Fredericksburg, Richmond, and then Manassas kind of all started from that 20s to the 40s period. And that kind of continued along for a while, but then World War II happened, right? And slowed everything down, and things kind of slowed down. As a matter of fact, speaking to Gettysburg, for example, those monuments that were built almost got destroyed in World War II because they needed the metal. Those monuments are actually on the chopping block. The Meade statue, that if things didn't go well, they were all getting melted down for the metal. So that kind of goes on and on and on.
The thing that, and I, of course, we're recording this episode, and I've just come back from Shiloh the day before, and what had always sort of amazed me is the way that Shiloh sort of grew. You mentioned it kind of starting with the cemetery and then beginning to expand out. And, you still don't have the entire battlefield there preserved by the NPS, but you've got, such a massive portion of it. You can tell so many of the stories. And that's sort of the gift of both of our shows, is that we get into those stories and we sort of talk about what's happening on that battlefield. And just using Shiloh as sort of the example, you roll through that April 6th and 7th, and you can use the Purdy Road as your guide. You drive down all the way back to the very entrance of the park and start day 1, drive all the way back to the back of the park, get to the visitor center, then turn around and go back down, and you will follow day 2 on April the 7th, and you can follow that layer of progression. And I couldn't imagine, and I do it every day, so I guess I could imagine, is being able to interpret a battlefield in the middle of a neighborhood, because you couldn't do that at Shiloh. First off, the terrain wouldn't allow it, but second, there's no way to tap into, where this regiment is, who's in this regiment, who's in this brigade, what's happening here. I stood yesterday on the hill that Clyburn had to defend, that Patrick Clyburn had to defend on the second day. And not only having listened to your all's episodes, but read so many great books. The Shiloh book by Timothy Smith, Oliver, the Cunningham book as well.
Yep.
There's some serious book enabling right there. You can't put that in your mind if you're not looking at that hill and you're not looking at that ground. You're watching the way that it rolls, it undulates,
Jeez.
if you will, and the tree growth, and like that's what we kept trying to stress to some of the other people in the car with us was, look at this. This is what they went through. Look at the open timber. Look at the overgrowth. This is what happened. You can't do that as easily at say Mary's Heights.
You can't describe if you're
the same way.
if you're trying to describe Iverson's brigade at Gettysburg walking across at Oak Hill when the soldiers in the Union from the 12th Mass said it looked like the ground swallowed them up, right? And they appeared. It wouldn't make any sense until you walk it and realize it's got a little dip in the middle that would be filled in now. So same thing with some of these other battlefields. And if you don't have the ability to walk the actual ground, you really miss out on so much. Because a lot of it doesn't make any sense. You go, well, why did this happen the way it did? Well, it's because they couldn't be seen. Exactly. You look at the Battle of Vicksburg and how, how they couldn't make it across some of the Abadees and stuff like that. Well, it's because they couldn't be seen. And so that's why it's important. And it's a real shame what happened to Mary's Heights. It really, really is. Because if you go there, you can imagine it, but it's like looking at a picture in a museum saying, well, that's the way it must have been like. And places like Gettysburg, for example, or Antietam or Manassas, and places that are really preserved for the most part, especially places like Antietam, it makes so much sense. You can walk in the Westwoods, you can walk in the cornfields, you can see what the soldiers saw. And that's why this preservation is important, because for many of these fields, especially in places like Virginia, Chantilly comes to mind. It's like you're walking in someone's backyard. That's what it's been reduced to.
Well, you describe it as a postage stamp, and the example from the Western Theater I can think of it is Ezra Church. It's in the middle of Atlanta. You don't know, you can't get an idea of what happened there. And the research I did for that episode, of course, I was reading Howard's memoirs. Our listeners know he's my favorite general.
Shocker!
Is that the number one? Is that the first reference for Oliver Otis Howard?
Yeah, so everybody take a drink.
All right.
But you have to say, hallowed be thy name after you say Howard. That's the problem.
Be thy name. But you read his memoirs, and he explains in those memoirs that the reason why he was putting his troops the way he did was because the terrain reminded him of Chancellorsville and what happened to him with Stonewall Jackson. You go there now, there's no way to see that at all. Because it's not.
Yeah. That's how Nashville has always felt for me. Is you go to Nashville, and obviously it was going to get built upon. It's a large metropolitan city, even in 1864. But I don't know, a little part of your heart breaks when you're trying to follow the battle line. It's like, oh, Walthal's Redoubt or Loring's Redoubt is the neighborhood, and there's just a giant. I mean, the street sign is Loring Court. And that's it. That's how you know you're on the battlefield, is you start to see the street names change. And there's no way to put in your mind. It's hard to orient yourself. Which way am I facing? Which way is the line? There's no way to do it when there's all this development right on top of it. And I think there will never be a way that we would be able to reclaim everything and set it all the way back. But there's a way, I think, to engage the public in reclamation efforts, and there's an economic impact to it as well. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure.
This is not a simple black and white topic. There's so many different angles that you've got to like you said, economically impacting the modern locals, but that's something too that I think is sort of maybe not so much talked about, is really getting the public, involved. Of course, we as historians, there's nothing more we'd love more than to, have every single battlefield, reclaimed and, and sort of put in a neat little box, because, historians love their neat little boxes. but historians have to have help from the public.
No, and I think, when you talk about the public, you had that fourth era of preservation for these Civil War fields that really started in the late 80s, early 90s, 1990s, with that Ken Burns series, right? That came out. It coincided with the release of the movie Gettysburg. And so you kind of did have that public kind of awareness all of a sudden where people watch and say, wait a second, that's right down the street from me. Yeah. People were maybe realizing what these statues finally meant. You saw the establishment of like the Civil War Trust, for example, now the American Battlefield Trust, Battle of Franklin Trust, that we're going to talk about later. And these are groups that kind of came out with, because they did have public support to help defeat that urban development, right? And try to acquire some battlefield ground that was for purposes of preserving them for prosperity. And that's really what the challenge is. But I think starting in that 90s, and that's where the Civil War people really owe a lot to Burns with this. It really spurred reenactments again. It kind of regenerated a lot of that enthusiasm, that excitement again towards that 4-year period in the 1800s, where until then it was just 4 years in a book and that was the end of it. He kind of brought that to life again and realized that the Civil War wasn't that long ago. And so he kind of, it was a shot in the arm. So, American Battlefield Trust, they formed in 1987, right around that point. And then they preserve grounds, about 24 states now. And, I think over 53,000 acres since they started. And so I think the momentum is there for the most part. I just think, that's the secret, is to keep the momentum going and maybe spreading it from the east, heading it more towards west, where it's still kind of focused.
Yeah, and I think too the other thing as well is the story of how some of these battlefields came to be is just as interesting as going to the battlefields themselves. And I know, Darren, you want to talk a little about Dan Sickles and his role, because he everybody gives him a lot of shit for Gettysburg. But he's why Gettysburg's there,
Gettysburg, that seems to be the hub, whether you like it or not. That seems to be the gateway drug into the Civil War for a lot of folks, is Gettysburg, especially if you're in the East, because it's easy to get to. Preservation really started there really, really early, before the war even ended. That Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association kind of got started, and they were trying to raise money to purchase significant areas of the battlefield almost immediately. You started to see monuments popping up there as early as 1878, right in that ballpark. And by 1893, 1895, you had the National Military Park established. But they always had that battle between memorialization and commercialization. Now, Gettysburg is interesting, though, because people always think of Gettysburg as a sleepy little village in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. It's really not. It's the county seat of Adams County. It's got this at the time of the battle, it had 2 major universities, 7 churches. It had a national bank that printed over $4 million in its own currency in about a 70-year period. So 400 to 500 buildings dotted the town. It was a big town for that period. So it was one that was fighting commercialization really from day one, because it was already there. Now, this is where Dan Sickles comes in. Dan Sickles famously got his 3rd Corps wrecked that day at the 2nd day of Battle of Gettysburg at the Peach Orchard. Although he will tell you that he did not. He will absolutely defend that to the death, And you can debate whether he was successful at Gettysburg all day or not. But you can't debate how well he did preserving that battlefield. That's just a fact. So in the 1870s, veterans of the battle are trying to raise money. And Sickles is in New York City. And apparently he was appalled that he saw veterans from New York trying to raise money to build monuments at Gettysburg. And many of these people were poor themselves, could barely feed themselves or their families. And they're trying to raise money to build monuments for their regiments. So Sickles decided to become very, very active in this field. And he becomes chairman of the New York State Legislature's Commission of the Monuments at Gettysburg. So he's going to put a lot of politics behind it. He oversaw the placements of all those New York monuments, 44th, just 86, pick one, that he was behind all of them. He also, and this is interesting too, is he also provided the map of the battle that lasted for a while too. So what he said was kind of the way it worked. right up until like 1974, 75, people used his map as the map of the Battle of Gettysburg, which wasn't always correct. But you had a guy in Gettysburg named William Tipton who ran an electric cable car company. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to build a train track that went across the whole battlefield. You can take it. But this is back in the 1890s, 1891, 92, around there. But he wanted to destroy a lot of the battlefields, specifically places like Devil's Den, to build his tracks. Now, fortunatfortunately for Sickles in the Battle of Gettysburg, 1893 was the 30th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, right around the time that Tipton is trying to do this. So 30 years, so really July 2nd, 1893, it's 30 years to the day when Sickles went to the Peach Orchard. He is at the dedication of a New York monument at the cemetery. And he's given this big, fabulous speech about how everything Meade did was wrong, everything he did was right. But what happened was he was really focused on those monuments. And he kind of put in the public's mind that we have to put the government behind protecting this specific battlefield. Now, Tipton was like the enemy. He was the guy with the black hat, twisted the mustache, and that's who he was. He wanted to build all over it. So there's that funny story where the day of the 44th New York Monument dedication, the one up there right on Little Round Top, they were doing their little thing. The soldiers were up there talking, reminiscing about all the stuff they did, embellishing their stories, the way they tend to do. Tipton had set up a camera to photograph it, and someone recognized him and started to give him a hard time for it. And there was words back and forth. Allegedly, someone threw his camera off the ledge, and Sickles got sued $10,000 by Tipton, and who knows if he ever paid it. But Tipton's intention was to destroy Devil's Den, and so Sickles finally petitioned Congress to acquire that land, and the government pushed back, and they finally got it done. President Grover Cleveland in 1896 finally, and it was a decision that actually got pushed to the Supreme Court, and it was affirmed by them that they could protect this land. It was a big victory for all the Civil War battlefields at that time, because now you had federal and Supreme Court backing to protect the battlefields. And it wasn't, even with that being said, it wasn't until 1913 that there was money raised, and this is after Sickles died, to remove those train tracks. If you go to Gettysburg today, you can still see the remains of the train tracks on some of the places. And so that's kind of how it was. Now, Sickles, he has a reputation. While he was in charge of the New York Monument restoration, money was disappearing, and we never found it. I think it was like about 30 grand fell off the truck.
It wouldn't be Uncle Dan if it wouldn't happen.
But because of his celebrity and who he was, they never really pursued it. But who the hell knows what happened to it? But they never built a monument for him. And so one of the quotes he had before he died was, they asked him about it, and he goes, "The whole damn battlefield's my monument." And you know what, though? When you're sitting at Little Round Top, like I do, and I smoke my cigar in my little secret place where no one goes, and you look out at that vista, and you see Devil's Den, the triangular field, you really can't owe that to Dan Sickles. You really can, because that would have been commercial development. And if it wasn't for his real effort, that became his life goal as it really went on, was to preserve that specific battlefield. And that kind of spurred other battlefields to kind of do it as well. But specifically for him, that was certainly his legacy. I mean, he's a colorful past militarily, there's no question. But you can't deny, anybody who attacks him for Gettysburg has to look at that other side, that you can attack him all you want, but the fact that you can sit there and spend the weekend and do a battle tour is because of him. It really is.
Kind of growing up in the Gulf South, at least close by to me is Port Hudson. And there's a lot of, development over there, but, honestly, they do a pretty good job with battlefield preservation. But, sort of going into this episode, I was looking at a few things, and it kind of reminded me of the Battle of Bryce's Crossroads. It's sort of in the, northeast corner of Mississippi, and, arguably it's one of the, best preserved Civil War battlefields, because of how much land they're able to preserve. I want to say that a lot of this battlefield is actually bought up by the Agnew family. and they eventually, sell bits and pieces of it to the Bryce's Crossroads National Battlefield Commission, which was actually established back in 1929. And they do a really good job here, and it's actually with the help of the Civil War Trust that they're able to preserve over, like, I want to say almost directly, it's like 1,423 acres, which is like 99.9% of the entire battlefield, which, I mean, that's impressive enough. But, that's one of these, late in the Civil War battles, we see Major General Nathan Bedford Forrest going up against the, Union forces of Brigadier General Samuel Sturgis. And, this is a, late war battle, and it's still just incredibly, important as anyone.
It's a cool battle too. It's one of I think my dad and I did a trail all the way up the Natchez Trace to where it hooked into 65 or Highway 31 and 65, and we did Bryce's Crossroads. We went down to Tupelo, did Tupelo, then turned around, hit Okolona, and then all the way up here to Tennessee, and did Mount Pleasant, Henryville, Columbia, Spring Hill, Franklin, the whole nine. And that's the gift of having these battlefields preserved, or at least just having a sign there. We'll talk about our sponsor at the end, Civil War Trails, but it's in large part to them that there's a lot of these places, especially Virginia and Tennessee, that have signage on these different battlefields that help you to visit these places.
And I think that's,
too,
like Civil War Trails, like we did an episode where with them where we did a fundraiser for them or just working with them on some stuff, and they are happy to tell not just the well-known stories but the lesser known stories too that maybe don't get told as much, which is really, really interesting. And I think a lot of these battlefields, the reason they're preserved, the ones that are well preserved, have come down to kind of a grassroots effort. You have, even I would consider Dan Sickles to be that way. Like, he's one guy and he's like, we're preserving this. Who you mentioned, Bo, with Bryce's Crossroads, and it also goes back to Kennesaw with that Illinois regiment buying up Cheatham's Hill. They bought up the spot where a lot of them had, a lot of their fellow soldiers had died when they attacked that. And clearly preservation was very, very important to them. But then you think of the spots like Ezra Church, Chantilly, these postage stamps that you can't get an idea of how the battle happened. And, all we can do is just continue to tell the story and hope that maybe someday, like what's happened at Franklin with the reclamation of certain areas and what continues to happen, and just with how well preserved somewhere like Antietam or Gettysburg is, that maybe someday that'll happen to that area too. But it goes back to the whole, like, you're fighting with the commercialization and residential aspects of it, right? Like at Mary's Heights, like, I've seen pictures of it, and like behind it's a bunch of houses. You can't get an idea really of what those soldiers went through. Kennesaw was very much it started as this grassroots effort, and Kennesaw is this battle in the Western Theater that is absolutely horrific. A lot of the some of the generals that fought there had fought at Gettysburg. My second Howard reference. He said that what he saw at Kennesaw was worse than what he witnessed at Gettysburg. And he specifically mentioned Little Round Top too, so I don't know if that was throwing some shade at Chamberlain or whatever, but he said he'd never seen anything as bad as that to that point. The fighting was absolutely horrific there, but it started off with this Illinois regiment buying some land in the late 1800s, which is now Cheatham's Hill, which I've never been there, but Darren has. And Darren, you said that Cheatham's Hill, like you said, the breastworks there, the most well preserved that you've seen, right?
Oh, they're real and they're spectacular, Mary. The breastworks at Cheatham's Hill. Those are some of the best ones that you'll see when you see some of these ones. There are places like Spotsylvania that are really good too. But if you walk Cheatham Hill, anywhere, Big Kennesaw, Little Kennesaw, that entire battlefield, the work they did to preserve them is just absolutely fantastic. So it's just most of these places are walking parks now. Bristow Station's kind of like that. It's a dog walking park for the most part, with a cannon is what it is now. But it is preserved though. People still go there. They probably don't know why there's a cannon there, but realistically, most people in that part of Virginia.
Yeah.
But the challenge in certain places, and Bo had hinted at earlier, is some of the land of these places is primo land. You're talking that Manassas, Virginia area, that's a Washington, D.C. suburb. You buy a house in Manassas, that's big money, Mary. That's you certainly can't afford it, no question. You're working at the DQ down there, you're not going to get that. But
There's our
but
DQ
that's
reference.
but that's how so it's tough for these places to justify. So for these battlefield groups to raise money to preserve land.
Yeah.
That's what makes the fact that Manassas is so preserved a miracle. A miracle, because that land, I invite anyone to go on Google Earth and look at Manassas battlefield, and you'll see the highway, and right below the highway is the urban developments, and then right north of the highway it stops where it's saved. It is night and day, and that's exactly how it would have been, because that land is so expensive. And the economic factor, as much as we love history and everybody would love to see, even the casual history fans would love to see a historical pretty venue, a lot of these places for the towns, it comes down to dollars and cents, and there's another side to this that people don't always talk about, which is the economic side.
And the economic side of it. So you have this group at Kennesaw, like 60 acres at Cheatham's Hills being preserved in the late 1800s. That's the only portion. And you have private ownership of where Kennesaw Mountain was fought from, until 1933, when the National Park Service started to initiate land acquisition for this. And Kennesaw was actually established as a national battlefield on February 18th, 1917. August 10th, 1933, it transfers from the War Department and is redesignated as a national battlefield park on June the 26th, 1935. Takes till 1966 to get it registered as a historic place, but still there's a lot, like 33 to 41, there's still a lot of private land ownership that they got to buy back, and who knows how the landscape had changed. But it was one interesting story I found, just because that Illinois regiment that wanted that Cheatham's Hill, that 60 acres, and it was one guy, I think, touring there with his daughter. He took her there, and she was like, why don't you buy this? And he got together with his old, his soldier buddies, and that's what they decided to do. Chickamauga is another interesting story. It's the one that, when you visit Chickamauga, it is what all the other battlefields were based off of. And it's a fascinating place to visit. It's gigantic. You can walk from the visitor center all the way up to Snodgrass Hill. You're walking Thomas's Union line, that almost a mile long, that on September 20th, 1863, before he had to head back to Chattanooga because the Confederates, ran back to Chattanooga because the Confederate, exactly. My people need me.
Duty call.
I had to go back to Chattanooga. But it's one of these places where you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere almost, and it's so peaceful. And it's got there's so many cannons, and then you find out that they sent cannons to Gettysburg, so you're like, well, how many did you have here to begin with?
I was kind of blown away by the amount of cannons at Shiloh yesterday. Just on Ruggles line alone, I was
You were blown away by cannons, Joey?
Wow.
I was blown away by
bad.
cannons. Yeah, I know. That was the worst pun.
That might be, Darren, is that up there with my
awful.
introductions?
No, it's not that. Nothing's that bad. Your introduction is a late Venice dancing band, Mary. It's not crazy.
I was astounded by the number of cannons on Ruggles, just Ruggles line alone, and they don't even have all 60. They've just got maybe 30 or 40 of them. But then you drive around the rest of the battlefield, and you're like, wait a second, there's a cannon like every 100 yards, and you start counting. I mean, there's more than 300 cannons there.
Yeah, I think
and that might be a
Chickamauga,
low
it seems
estimate.
like everywhere I looked there was like a cannon. And the one fascinating thing about Chickamauga, you compare it to Gettysburg, is Chickamauga is very much a soldier's battlefield, in that the soldiers were the ones that made it. There is not one monument to a general on that battlefield. And that's why, I tell people to go there and say, like, you'll have a great experience, but it'll be a different experience than Gettysburg, because the soldiers made it what it was. The only general's monument is in Ringgold Gap, and it's Patrick Cleburne.
And that was only put up a couple of years ago,
And
huh?
and it's funny where he is, because he's at the marker for where the Atlanta campaign began, which I'm sure Sherman would not be happy about at all. So I think somebody had a sense of humor. with the placement of that, because if you know the history behind
Yeah.
those two, it's pretty funny. But yeah, Chickamauga is definitely its history, how it was established, and just how different it is from Gettysburg. You know, and just the level of preservation. And you drive like less than a mile away, you're in civilization again.
Yeah.
How to be haunted by a Union general. Put up a sign. Put up the sign next to Cleburne. Or put up the sign by no big deal. Actually, back in 2013, I'm still very disappointed that Joey didn't join us. But from what I could tell, I mean, it seemed as if the Resaca battlefield was, pretty well preserved. I don't know to what extent it actually is. But from the parts that we were at, it seemed like it was
A lot of that
in pretty
land
good
is
hands.
privately owned too. That's not all part of the battlefield. So,
Right.
I think the battlefield is a small segment
Right.
of a lot of sort of like farmland almost, or pasture land. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is
that's what it
still
seemed like anyway.
preservation in a sense.
At least it's preserved. Like, Darren, isn't Kernstown privately owned?
Well, I was going to mention Kernstown is privately, but the danger is someone deciding I can't afford, I got to sell this, and they're going to sell it to the Walmart, and that's going to be it. Now, a Kernstown was what a Walmart would fit right in. Unfortunately, it's right there in the middle of all the strip malls. It looks like you're pulling into a cul-de-sac, and then there's a gate, and then sometimes it's open, sometimes it's closed, but there's a battlefield there. Ball's Bluff is the same way, where it's set back a little bit, but that is the challenge. And that's why a lot of these groups like Battlefield Trust is trying to get ownership of this land for perpetuity, so they can maintain it. Because private land is great if someone's trying to maintain it, but it's only as good as you have that current owner. And if they decide to flip that, then there's nothing that you can do about it. And I see that here in Boston, all the Revolutionary War sites, for the most part, Bunker Hill, Breeds Hill, they're all built over. Yeah. There's nothing. You can go see them, but it's walking through the neighborhood, and there's little markers, and that's the best you're going to get. So there's definitely a risk with that, especially in the bigger cities.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine some Bostonian would be rather pissed off if you went and knocked on his door and be like, "Can I stand in your living room? Because I'm pretty sure this is where,
every Bostonian is nice. We are sweet. We are totally accommodating.
They're just like Canadians.
Just drive in the city, and I will show you that's absolutely, you're completely wrong. No, trust me. If you but that's the thing, is like where Charlestown is, where Bunker Hill is, and it's all built over. And I actually had a friend of mine who lived there, and they did an excavation in his yard, and they found a red coat skeleton in his backyard, because they wanted to dig. So pretty cool. But yeah, I would say he sat there on his deck drinking a Yingling, watched them dig up on dig up on red coat.
As you do.
But that's what he did. But that's what it's been reduced to. And you don't want to get to that point and have to try to recover the land or recoup the land. The goal is to keep the land as it is, and just try to keep it in perpetuity.
Well, let's talk about reclamation now, huh?
I still need to talk to the Pizza Hut CEO, because I don't know what it is about Pizza Hut and buying battlefield land, but
see, Pizza Hut, the CEO must have been a big Civil War guy. It's probably like Shelby Foote's uncle or something. And he bought
Pizza
We've
Foot.
made jokes about whoever was lined up at the Pizza Hut.
He bought all the primary land, right? The primo land. And he built Pizza Huts on there. And that's exactly what he did. Same thing with Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC. The Kentucky Monument at Gettysburg is beautiful. It's right there, and you can go in there and you can buy chicken. It's perfect, But that's the truth of it. But when you talk about reclamation, though, that's when you get into the real economic part of it. So when you got something that's been built over, and going back to Gettysburg again, in 2014, the American Battlefield Trust acquired General Lee's headquarters. And they tore down the General Lee Motel, as well as the Appalachian Beer Company, which broke my heart, by the way. They tore that down. But what they did is they rebuilt it to look kind of way it did when Lee was there. And that's really cool. What it is now, it's another stop on the battle tour, which is fantastic. But what that meant for the town was you lost 48 hotel rooms, right? You lost restaurants, $12,000 annually to Adams County, $12,000 to borrow to Gettysburg, and $34,000 to the Gettysburg Area School District. That's $62,000 annually lost to the town coffers. Now, it's great if you're a historian, you're a tourist, but if you're a local living in these places, your taxes are going up. The town of Gettysburg, 38% of the entire town is tax exempt. When you're talking churches, the schools, the nonprofits, and the battlefield. So they have to make up that difference. So that's the downside of this. As much as reclamation is important, it has to be economically feasible for the people who live there. Otherwise, it's gonna dry out. And that's the reality.
American Battlefield Trust has a great pamphlet out there, and we can put up of course, the links to the information for it. But it's I think it's called the informational packet about the economic impact is gray, blue, and green. And the green, of course, is the money and the dollars and cents of the whole thing. And they're very good about explaining, if you want to acquire this piece of property, hey, you know what? That's great. But we have to look at the costs, and not only the cost to the organization and the cost to the individual that wants to acquire that land, but it's also the cost to the town, like what it would cost that county, what it would cost that city in order to give up that section of land. And that's one of the things that we've been able to do with American Battlefield Trust and with the Battle of Franklin Trust, is that when the public engages in saying, it's fine, this should be saved, this is a piece of land that needs to be saved, that's when it's almost as if the town is saying, we don't mind the tax hike in order to do that. And that's where we come in, is the public can be involved in those decisions, picking up patches of really, really incredibly important ground. And that's what they did out east. That's how Manassas really kind of started back in the 1950s, was they picked, I think they started at Henry House Hill and then just sort of began to spread out. And then I guess maybe now is a good time to talk about the Battle of Franklin and the Battle of Franklin Trust, is that it's an organization they've only been around since 2009. So you're looking at about 11 years worth, or 12 years. I've got that good math.
Oh, just like me.
Good math,
I'm a historian, not a mathematician.
Can you,
No, I can't.
can you see her
count
lips
either.
moving trying to do the math? You see that?
Count like
Yeah, I was doing it. I was doing
I
it
ran
down
out
here,
of
and I was
fingers.
like, wait.
I ran out of fingers.
12. It's only 12 years old.
we call that
no.
the McClellan Math School.
Mac math.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yes.
But the Battle of
Mac
Franklin
math.
Trust was born in 2009, and it really started on what is today called the Eastern Flank Battlefield Park. And it started with Carnton, the home of John and Carrie McGavick. It would be used as a field hospital during the battle on November 30th, 1864. But the land right across or literally across the courtyard, across the driveway for the country club that was there, had always been a part of the battle. And reclamation efforts at Carter House were completely different than what had started at Carnton. Because if you would have gone to Franklin from 1955 onwards, all you would have ever known about the Battle of Franklin is what happened at Carter House. Because that's what was saved. That was the one house with a little piece of land right adjacent to it that was saved. There was a house right next door to it and a house right next to that. And that whole area began to develop. And as Nashville grew, Franklin grew. And as more people came to Franklin, the neighborhoods spawned out over it. But this area was set out as the Franklin Golf Course. And in 2009, a group called the Carnton Association, Franklin's Charge, and what would eventually become the Battle of Franklin Trust managed to actually persuade the descendants to purchase that land. And not only did they purchase it, but the city came in and they dedicated it as a battlefield. And so that was the first part of reclamation, was buying back the golf course. Today, when you walk through it, I've posted several pictures out on evening walks on the battlefield where you can see the ground. You can see where Loring's division, where the Confederate advance started. But then when you get over back towards 431, back towards the highway, the Lewisburg Pike, you're right back into the neighborhoods. You're right back into development. And the first couple times I came to Franklin, I wanted to see where Israel Stiles, Illinois and Indiana Brigade was, and where the guns of the 4th U.S. Artillery were. And I was standing in front of an antique shop and a house. And I was trying to justify that in my head, because you come across that big, beautiful field, and all of a sudden you're in a parking lot. And then I think the first time I came to Franklin, the Domino's was still there. So this area right around Carter House had developed. There's a strip mall, there's a Domino's, there's a Pizza Hut, and then American Battlefield Trust, the Battle of Franklin Trust, after the Battle of Franklin Trust acquires Carter House, all that starts to get ripped away. But what had happened for so long was that there were locals in Franklin, I'm talking the old timers, that just accepted it. You know, they said, oh, it'd be great, but it could never happen. And to date, there's about 285 acres that have been saved and reclaimed. And a lot of it is the Carter Hill property. There was the high school gymnasium was on top of it. On the other side, there were 2 houses, private residences. They were bought, and that ground is cleared, and now you can see where Patrick Claiborne and John Calvin Brown's divisions charged into the center of the federal line. On the other side of the street, you can actually see where Theodore Thomason's 1st Kentucky Battery was, where the 100 and 104th Ohio is. And not only that, you can talk about some of these stories. You can go and see the guns of the 6th Ohio Battery. You can stand there and you can read Aaron Baldwin's report where he talks about having to fend off attackers with a pickaxe and sponge staves. You know, you can go and stand where the 104th Ohio, the Barking Dog Regiment, where Harvey the dog was running around. Go across the street and you can stand right where Otho Strahl and John Brown's division was killed. You can go and stand in the 44th Missouri's line, and you can see where this brand new regiment that had just been mustered into service, where they bent but refused to break. You can also see where Todd Carter was mortally wounded. And all of that is possible through the reclamation efforts. And it's taken a lot of money, you know. But it didn't happen overnight. It goes all the way back to 1864. It goes all the way back to the McGavicks taking care of that cemetery. It goes all the way back really to the first battlefield tour guide, Moscow Carter, the son of Fountain Branch Carter, the owner of the Carter House. Moscow lived there well into the 1890s, and he would welcome veterans back to the house and show them where they were on the battlefield. So on almost every tour of the Carter House, I tell people, like, I have a predecessor and it's Moscow Carter. You know, I'm only X amount of years removed from him. And we get to do that every single day there because of the ground that we've saved. We get to tell their story, which is a story of, you know, it's human tragedy mixed with the triumph of the human spirit, mixed with endurance. And then there is loss, and there's tragedy, and there's destruction all around you. And then you stand in that field over by the golf course, where it used to be the golf course, and it's beautiful. And for a minute, you almost kind of forget what happened in that spot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Battle of Franklin Trust, their motto there is to preserve, understand, and interpret the story of the people impacted by the American Civil War. That's exactly what it says right on their banner when you pull up their website. And so, like many of these places, it's designed to tell that story and help raise money. And so, and their trust is a challenging one. So it's a smaller one. It doesn't have the revenues of the, you know, it's under $2 million revenue, you know, annually for the most part. If you look up the stuff, but it's a very highly thought of trust. I mean, if you look up there are services you could look up as far as charities, how they're rated. There's one called Charity Navigator, and the BOFT is one of the only ones that get a full 100 out of 100 rating. Even ABT doesn't get that. So it's true. So it's important when you realize that it's got a great reputation and for all the work they're trying to do. And it's important to look at people like that when you're looking to put money in to save. Nothing against these other ones, but sometimes you want to look at more of these grassroots type ones where you can actually target where the money's going to go.
I think that's what it's about. And Franklin is one of those battles that, you know, unfortunately, I think it gets overlooked a lot. But it's one of those battles when you study, you realize the impact. You realize what happened there. You know, you have 6 commanders killed, and just that loss, and that, you know, Darren and I did an episode of that back November 2020, and of all the episodes we've done, it was one of the hardest ones I've had to edit. Just and also just, you know, the research, it was just more something about it, because you realize at that point the Civil War is almost over and you're questioning why. Like, you know, this is just, it's absolute like it was horrible what happened there, and who knows what went through those men's minds when they looked across that field and were like, holy shit,
Yeah.
this is what we have to
I mean, they
do.
had no
Like,
idea. They had no idea that the war
and
was
it's
going
one
to
of
end
the
in 6 months. They had no
no.
clue. But I think, I think there's a couple of different ways that you can look at it. And this is something that we say on every tour, is that they're the guys on the Confederate side. They're not the guys that are going home. They are the bitter enders. They are the ones that are going to go to their graves. And I think that has to do with why the fight is so ferocious. But what Franklin does is it sets you up for Nashville. What Nashville does is it destroys the army, the Confederate Army of Tennessee, and that's it. I mean, their war is effectively over. They will limp until April. And what I think is so interesting is that you can look at Franklin, and I believe it's Jacob D. Cox, who says, from Franklin I could see clear to the end of the war. When you say that, you understand why our name tags all say, the Battle of Franklin Trust, learn how the Civil War redefined America. Because you can teach that lesson at Franklin, because you can point directly to the end of the war. You can point directly to the fact that this war will end in April, and it will bring about an entire, as Lincoln would say in his second inaugural, a new birth of freedom. And it does redefine this country. It sets this nation on an entirely new course. But it all starts on, it goes all the way back to the very beginning of the nation, all the way up to 1864. And everything is on that course. Yep. And then there's this fatal day, November 30th, 1864. And it redefines the war in the Western Theater, redefines the war as it stands. I think a large part of preservation, and if you don't mind if I get a little poetic, maybe wax lyrical, I don't know, is...
No, go ahead.
We look back at just what Lincoln said at Gettysburg in November of 63. He said that we can't physically consecrate or dedicate these grounds. They've already been hallowed. It's not up to us. It's those men that have already done it. But in a lot of ways, I don't know that Lincoln was necessarily talking to the crowd that day, so much as he was talking to our generation and later generations of Americans that would be able to visit those battlefields and understand what it meant when those men gave their last full measure of devotion. And it's there that we can say that we go to those places, we can dedicate those grounds now as sacred and hallowed, and understand that those that have died didn't die in vain. And it all goes back to that, and that's why we preserve battlefields.
Yeah, his speech was definitely talking to us. His whole unfinished work, everything. He was talking 100 years down the road. He really was a lot of different things. And so, our meager task as people who study this silly little thing is to try to find a way to get more people into it and more jazzed up by it, to create that new generation of people going to help carry that torch, so that people 50 years from now are able to see the same sights we do, and maybe reconnect at some of the places that are gone now, then maybe can come back.
And I think it's about humanizing these individuals as well, and the individual stories from Franklin, that happened there, not just them as soldiers, but my favorite one is Claiborne before the battle, and the chessboard that he draws in the dirt, the final hours of his life. And what does he want to do? He wants to play chess. Probably because that took his mind off of what was about to happen. We're looking at a guy that, and I think he knew he wasn't coming out of that battle alive. Like, he's one of those ones that just, he's ready to give it his all. And into it's these stories that happen after, like how his fiance, she does end up marrying, a Confederate general a few years later, but then she dies less than a year after that. It's those stories too, and just humanizing them.
Somebody said earlier that I get to live the dream, and they're right. I mean, I do.
Oh, you do?
I have the dream job. I get to talk about these guys every day, and I'm surrounded by their stories. And, sometimes you take a tour and you go on autopilot, and then some days you take a tour and you're in it. And it's in those times where you're in it, where things start to click that maybe they had never clicked before that day. But you start to say, man, I wonder what he was thinking. Then you go and you find the soldier, whoever it is. I just found a 44-year-old father who was wounded, severely, mortally wounded at the Battle of Spring Hill. He was drafted only about a month and a half before the battle. He didn't have to be there. But now I know that part of the story. There's three brothers, or three family members, the Bogan family, 2 sons and a father. And the father is killed, and they're in the 175th Ohio. And, I talk about that regiment every day, but I never think about the Bogans until one day it just clicked. Oh my gosh, they're right here.
Well, you say, corps are comprised of, divisions to brigades to regiments to companies, but companies are made of fathers and sons and brothers. You bring it down to that lower level, and if you start at that point and you work your way up, it becomes so much easier to study because it resonates. Because that's the important part of studying this stuff, is the husband, the father, the brother. That's more important than the company, the regiment, the division, because that's really how it all starts.
And here at Homebrew History, we would like to give a huge, tremendous tip of the hat, a commendation to the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast for bringing that part of the story to it. This is the humanity, the human part of the war, because it's so often just dots on a map, just lines that are moving around. And you guys have, yesterday I was sitting there, I was like, they talked about Henry Morgan Stanley. Well, let's go see where Henry Morgan Stanley was at Shiloh. And so we went over there. It's you guys have done such a wonderful job, and I know that you've got a listenership that loves what you do, and I love what you do, and just keep on trucking.
Yes, definitely hoping you guys are the next Ken Burns series to light that fire of, revisiting the study of Civil War. Because someone has to. Like, Joey kind of mentioned earlier, with Lincoln talking to future generations. I hope to be around when historians start looking into all these historical podcasts that have popped up. If there is a silver lining, and there's not really any, but if there is one, if there is a silver lining behind all this, the COVID pandemic, is I really honestly think that for the historical community as a whole, all these different podcasts all over the world has greatly benefited our craft. To be honest with you, Joey can probably attest to this, but who knows if we may have never met the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast had it not been for this COVID outbreak and everything like that. But yeah, you guys do excellent work, and we're big fans here at Homebrew.
Thank you. Well, we both enjoy what you two do as well. The World War II, Civil War, all of it. I'd say the
ramblings of two madmen.
Yeah, the artillery, but it's kind of that down to earth kind of approach where you just talk about it in terms that you can bring it to the average person.
That was actually one of our goals.
There's the laughter and all that. Yeah. Too.
Yeah, absolutely. We've brought people from all over the world, just onto our podcast. But probably one of the ones that sort of comes into mind is Peter Caddick Adams. And
Peter's episodes.
That man,
he gets on and talks.
They are great. He does, but he also writes bullet stopper books. Right, could stop an .06 round. And it's good to bring him on, because typically outside of academia, someone may not read
all
Caddick Adams'
pages
books.
of that book. Yeah.
Right, whereas we can bring him on for an hour and a half, maybe sometimes 2 hours with Peter, which Joey and I don't mind. Joey and I would talk to a brick wall if it had good conversation. But he's able to sort of break it down in sort of, like you said, layman's terms, and we're bringing history, we're making it fun and bringing it to a wide wide audience. Right.
Well, let's get that audience involved. Let's talk about how they can help us here towards the very end of the show. We're starting to wrap up, and I think that this is what we had come together, talked about this, is we want to do a little fundraiser. Mary, how about you tell us about what that fundraiser is going to be?
So we are doing a fundraiser for Battle of Franklin Trust. Every $5 you donate, you will get entered into a raffle to win this gift basket, which Joe is going to tell you everything that is in the gift basket. So over to you, Joe.
So we've...
Show me the goodies.
Show me potato salad. We've got a I Help Save the Battlefield t-shirt, and it is got the Battle of Franklin Trust logo on the front and a nice beautiful picture of Carter House on the back. That phrase on the back. We've also got 2 of our Battle of Franklin Trust coffee cup tumblers that will go with that, as well as a signed copy of Eric Jacobson's For Cause and for Country. And then both podcasts have thrown in some swag. From the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast, you will get a beautiful logo coffee cup. From the Homebrew History podcast, you will get a exclusive sticker pack containing all 4 of our logo stickers and our world famous now Bring Up the Piat sticker with Anthony Hopkins from A Bridge Too Far. Not quite Civil War related, but still the best movie and the best line ever said on screen.
An awesome sticker.
So, Mary, back to you for more of the details.
Each of our respective podcasts are going to tweet out the link to donate to Battle of Franklin Trust. And then on that page, you will find a donate button. Hit that, donate however much you want. Like we said, every $5 gets you an entry into the raffle to be put towards this gift basket that Joe has so awesomely put together for us here. And then from there, you can put in the notes field, you can put Battlefield Reclamation. And then from there, once you get your receipt, just screen cap that. Our listeners will be quite familiar with this part. You just screen cap your receipt and then send it to either info@civilwarbreakfastclub.com or Joe to your podcast.
For our Homebrew History listeners, you'll send it to homebrewhistory@gmail.com. And all of that will come together. And we'll have a great little podcast fundraiser here for BOFT. And, all that money goes directly towards historic preservation and battlefield reclamation. So don't think that the money doesn't go to a great cause. It doesn't pay me. It pays directly for finding some acreage that needs to be saved.
It's a great thing. Like I mentioned before, it's rated 100 of 100 by Charity Navigator. So it's a great cause. It's going to hopefully go towards a long way into helping reclaim some territory. Maybe even someday the dream of a solid gold Emerson Updike statue, Mary, right on the battlefield.
Those are fighting words.
Right?
Ooh. And we're never working with Homebrew History again.
Well, maybe we'll make a gold medal into a gold statue someday.
There we go.
It will have the Joseph Ricci memorial plaque on there, where he dropped dead the day it was memorialized. But regardless, we joke about it, but the big picture is all this money is going to go towards a great cause. And we're blessed right now to be able to see some of these sites. But if you want your grandkids or whoever to see these sites, or you want to see more sites, these are the groups you have to get behind and put the money into, because this land isn't going to free itself up. Unfortunately, land gets more expensive every single day. So without groups like BOFT, if you enjoy Franklin and you want to see Franklin more of it, this is what you have to do. And this is just a small effort in that step in the right direction. And hopefully it really takes off. Hopefully this is something that can really be a big moneymaker for them, and something that can spur more people to donate going forward. So I think a lot of people aren't familiar with them, and that just goes to show that people aren't familiar with the battle. And the Battle of Franklin is, if not the most underrated battle, it's certainly up there, because people don't study it enough. When we talked about that in our podcast, we mentioned that. And people out here in my neck of the woods, they don't know Battle of Franklin. Oh, they just don't. So the job for all of us is to help people become more of a mainstream battle. And so this is going to be a step in the right direction. So hopefully, $5 is great, but you know what? Kick in more. Don't be shy, because it's something that's going to go a long way. Yeah. No doubt.
And first off, want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. And, we're always happy to be by your side. So anytime we want to do this in the future, this has been super fun so far. And a reminder to all of our listeners that this episode of Homebrew History has been brought to you for the very first time by the Civil War Trails organization. Civil War Trails is the largest open-air museum, offering 1,350 sites across 6 different states. Drive the Antietam campaign turn by turn, hike to remote artillery emplacements, or paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace. One of those remote artillery emplacements, well, it's in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot down in Columbia, Tennessee. You can see where John Schofield fended off John Bell Hood for just a day or two before retreating to Spring Hill. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure today, and follow Civil War Trails on all their social media platforms and create some history of your own.
Wow, that was good.
Wow.
Very good.
That was good.
Yeah.
Can you do my
They
life?
sent me
You might want to tell Drew that Gettysburg Address was 271 words.
Cut it down.
Just the way you can bet.
That was good. And we just want to thank all of our listeners for tuning into this episode that we've partnered up with Homebrew History for, which we're very happy to. They're very much doing the same thing we are with this. We encourage all of our listeners to go out and start listening to their podcast. Joe and Bo are both great guys. Like they know their stuff about history, and I think we're at episode 58, right, Darren? Am I getting the math right on that?
Sounds about right. You tell me. I don't even know.
I hope so.
I just do as I'm told.
Right. Our listeners might be shocked at the lack of F-bombs from me for this episode, but for some reason, when other people join us, we work with other people for this, for some reason the F-bomb thing goes on.
Best behavior.
Yeah, you
become a people person.
I don't know how medicated you are tonight, Mary. This is incredible. My goodness gracious. Maybe hope for you, yes. Who knows?
Maybe. But yeah, thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into this episode, and please donate, even if it's just $5, to Battle of Franklin Trust. It's a great cause, and let's reclaim some more battlefield for future generations to see.
Well, cheers everybody, and you can always find us on social media for Homebrew History. Find us on Twitter at Homebrew History, Facebook Homebrew History Podcast. What about you guys on Civil War Breakfast Club?
Yeah, on Twitter we are CW Breakfast Club, and then Instagram Civil War Breakfast Club, and then we have our Facebook page as well as our website civilwarbreakfastclub.com. And as always, we will be doing our usual Facebook Live on Saturday at 10, and I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit battlefield preservation reclamation, but who knows? Conversations usually depend on the mood I'm in, right, Darren?
Yeah, it certainly does. But a lot of fun stuff coming. This is obviously a great time doing this, and kudos to you guys as well for doing this, because none of us do this for anything more than the passion, the history of why we do it. It's not like this is our full-time gig. I mean, but everybody can stretch imagination. So we do this on our own time to really keep that fire lit. And so anybody who does this stuff, I have the tremendous respect for, because I know there's a lot of things that pull our lives in different directions. And so to be able to have a passion for this, it puts us in a very, very unique club. And I think that's it's our responsibility to help teach and help keep that motivation. And so that's what's great about this. So you guys do a great job on that, as do a lot of them ones, but you guys do very, very well. And obviously the stuff you do for Franklin Joe is really, really good. That's very impressive.
Thanks, guys. All right. Well, Bo, take us out.
Take us home. More importantly, you're listening to this podcast. Be sure to thank a veteran, but more importantly, buy them a drink. They'll definitely appreciate that. Raise our glasses, and we'll say cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Be sure to donate.
Definitely.